tell my younger self as far as writing stuff, because a lot of this stuff is organic. You learn it as you go.
It's strange. It's nothing I ever expected.
I want to tell my stories by eliciting emotion in my audience.
So it's an organic process. They sort of layer on top of each other. Each one makes the next layer more obvious to me.
This whole thing could not have gone any smoother.
I usually say squat only in groups of 3. I like the batches, like squat, squat, squat.
Look, guys, this one's not going to be like normal. It's just not.
Welcome to the Writer's Journey. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the mellifluous Kaylin Williams.
That's a big difference. It's like, are you talking or are you doing? What's happening here?
We still have all the pets that think, oh, it's time to eat. It doesn't matter if it's 4 a.m.
My name is Walt, and this is Coffee and Concepts on Keystroke Medium.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Media. Man, I almost messed that intro up for the second day in a row. But at least I got the overlay changed before we went.
That's important. It really is the most important thing.
Look, as I get back into it and I get the nerves out, every show is going to get consistently better, I believe.
Until it just is too good to even show live.
We'll just put a picture of us on the screen, and then they can make
up shut us down. We get fined for awesomeness. You start getting canceled and stuff. You know,
true.
Then we'll know.
Very true. But then we've reached the top.
Reached the top. So I didn't get my live chat. Let me get my live chat worked out here.
You must have the live chat worked out. Speaking of which,
ask people how I sound, if I'm too loud today or too quiet, because last time I was too quiet.
I think you sound phenomenal.
That's fantastic.
Trucker Charlie gets the Keystroke Medium golf clap of appreciation today. So that's for you, Trucker, on the road, doing your thing. Welcome, welcome. Tom Hoddle's in the house. Rick Partlow's here. Welcome, welcome. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Look, we should post the time and then change it more often, because there's like 1,000 comments already in the chat, because people showed up, and it's all ready for me to read just right here. Scott McGlasson's in the house. Patricia Gillum, hello. Guy Anthony DeMarco, what's up, man? Lou's on time today. That's interesting. All right, cool. A bunch of people have been reaching out on Messenger, like, when are you guys going live? What are you doing? What's going on? And I'm like, yeah. Give me a minute. I gotta get stuff going. Leo may or may not be wearing pants. I'm not sure.
I'm not betting on it.
Whether or not he is.
Not betting on it. I love when I do the pop-out chat and I pull up the YouTube, and then I'm in the process of like pulling out the pop-out chat and counts on the YouTube just so I can watch our StreamYard. And like I got like this weird delay where you're talking, but there's like a second alter ego of you talking, like Bizarro Josh. It's like repeating everything you say. It's awesome.
Oh yeah. You're repeating yourself.
Does not give me a migraine at all to hear that.
Yeah. Scott Walker from Facebook's here. What's up? Hello. Alan Cheeseman's in the house. Elisa Richmond, what's up? How are you? And Ken Britz, as always. Ken, first of all, a shout out for updating the show notes, and I completely forgot that was a thing that you did until I get the message on Messenger. Hey, show notes are updated. I'm like, hat off to you, sir, because I completely forgot about that whole process. So
he is, man. With so many awesome people in the chat today. I'm so glad we started doing the show again.
100%. Let's rock out with some updates, man, for this week. And then we'll get hopping in the show. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Lots of links, Ken says. Yes, true. Tom says he's wearing pants, which is unfortunate. He said one of us had to be on time. The one time we're late. Okay, I see what you're saying. All right, no, I get it. It's fine.
Well, if he'll perform that duty in the future, then we can just not worry about being on time.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll just set it up like a legally binding contract, and we can just rock star this, where we just kind of show up and
Yeah.
keystroke prima donnas.
Because we're not already that.
I'm sure. That's the thing.
Let's see. What have I been going on this week? I have been, first of all, last week I had the highest, probably my record of most words written in a single day. I know it's a 2-year record.
That was some sick word counts.
My records from prior to 2021 are kind of spotty at best, and I didn't go back and research, but I'm fairly confident this is my all-time highest, which was 7,000 something. I should have pulled this up ahead of the show. No, I didn't want 2022. You know what I wanted. Internet.
Dang Google foo.
Yeah, my Google phone is lacking. What do you mean I have to require access? I can't stand this right now. Over 7,000 words. There, thanks, Paul. Look at that. Paul Kohler, I appreciate that. So 7,034 words I got in a single day. I did not set out to make that record. Basically, I woke up at like 3:30 for no other reason than I just woke up and couldn't go back to sleep. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go down and start writing. And I didn't stop. I had some breaks here and there. I had to go run and do stuff, but I didn't stop until probably like 6 p.m. that night. Which really brings up one of the questions that I am curious about, and we don't have to take a tangent on this, but you see a whole bunch of writers writing 10,000, 12,000, 20,000 words a day, posting, I wrote 43,000 words today or something like that. And just knowing the effort that it took to get to 7,000, like at 6,000, I was like, I am done. I absolutely am done. I don't want to do anymore. But then I was like, you know what? I'm going to break the record. And I did it. But the effort it took to get that was significant. And the very next day, I barely got 2,000. And I took a day off after that because my brain was just mush. But it really makes me question the validity, that stuff, about people who say they write like 20,000 words every day, day in and day out, and how good those words are. And how do you not get burnt out at a certain level where you're like,
I'm sure it's possible, but I have a hard time feeling that because I can smash some words, but not every day.
Walt says adding in your text messages doesn't count.
Right. Putting your social media stuff on there.
Yeah. Actually, I keep track of my words on my Mac with a word counter, and I set it to only track the words in specific apps, so I know that those are all fiction words.
Yeah. I do think Leah has the key to your high word count on that in reference to your dialogue.
I know you are, but what am I? I mean, it's like that scene. Like that scene in The Shining where he's like, all work and no play make Jack a dull boy.
That's true.
He had a 5,000 word day that day, and then he tried to kill his wife. Like, whatever.
Right.
Like, I didn't
get
the
elevator
that
with blood.
I was close. Red rum. Been making really good progress on Weaponized.
Rick says he only broke 6,000 once, but I thought that Rick broke 6,000 like on a daily basis. So
no, I watch Rick. He's a pretty solid 3K a day. Like if you look at his keystroke Rimo, it's like 3,001, 3,012, and I
guess if you do it every day, it really adds up.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
I've got 58,229 words written on Weaponized 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that puts me solidly at the halfway point ish. And the words are coming a lot faster than the front half. So I am hopeful that I can get most of it done. Hopefully by the end of the month, maybe a little bit into February, and Weaponized 2 will be done. And then I'll just jump right into the third one.
And you do all three before you publish?
Yeah, we're gonna do all three. It's, you know what, I don't. I've said this before, but I really don't like the publishing every 30-day model. I don't like having to write that fast. And I like to take a little bit more time to get my books written and spend a little bit more time going deeper in them than just smashing out words and publishing them. However, I will concede that releasing quickly,
velocity matters in
velocity
market
matters,
terms.
Momentum matters, but also when you're launching a new series, having more material to work with on the front end is better than not.
And it drops the pressure quite a bit if you got some in the magazine, so to speak.
100%, yeah. Because then, I mean, once you got that done, you've got, you know, at least 3 months to write book 4.
Yep. Well, I just finished Galactic Shield 4 this morning, and now I'm doing my pre-editor proofread / proof listen, and so that book will come out March 5th is what it's scheduled for. Book 3 is coming out January like 29th or 30th, and so it's a nice feeling to know I'm 2 books ahead. I've never been that far ahead before.
Yeah.
And boy, it takes the pressure off quite a bit if you can just kind of set that up. I like Walt's comment earlier when we were talking about word counts. He says, let's see. Yeah, there you go. Like going to the gym, the first time you write heavy, you feel spent because it's new, but if you do it all the time, it gets to be pretty standard. So like for me now, 3,000 words a day is not hard at all.
Yeah.
On the days it is hard, it might take me a few hours. Sometimes it takes me all day if I keep getting interrupted. But other times I'll write 3,000 words. It takes me 90 minutes. And in theory, I could be done for the day and go screw off. But usually I just keep writing.
Yeah.
If I can.
So, yep. I'm going to plow through on Weaponized. I've been invited to another project from Bain, another anthology project. I'm not sure if I can say which yet.
Darn it.
I've been listening to basically the background book for that, and been in some talks with some of the other authors that are in the anthology, so I can put together a short story for that. I think it's going to be due in like April-ish, probably. I think they're looking for like a March.
How many words?
I think around 10,000. That's usually the what I aim for.
So like 15,000.
Yeah, no, it's not sword and sorcery, Rick. It's another problem. I'll have to touch base and see if I can yak about it. I saw
Ken was asking about your fantasy.
Yeah, so that is still in the very early planning stages. I have a couple of ideas for that I'm hopefully going to be able to do one of those this year. We were talking about word counts and being ahead on Weaponized. I've been wanting to, in the evenings, kind of like on my off time when I don't feel pressure to knock out the words so much, is work on my fantasy stuff. The Aspect War is a really big project I've been kind of piecing together over the last couple of years. And I've got an idea for what could be a standalone introduction to the series. So I've been working that out, been fleshing out some ideas. I've got basically an initial outline of the whole thing, and I've got several of the first draft chapters done. I'm piecing bits and pieces of it into Dabble, which is the writing software I use. Maybe we'll do a show on that one day. There's people in here, Word, Scrivener. No, actually, I like both, but Dabble is very simple and easy to use. But anyway, so it's coming. I'm hopeful I get one of those novels written this year. I really enjoy the way that the story is kind of blossomed out from my original ideas, and the magic system is kind of developing, and as such, the characters are also getting a little bit more real in my head. So, and that's something maybe we can talk about today in our world building discussion about. You mentioned in our phone call previous about really getting to know the world that you're writing in, and going back and filling that stuff in. So,
yeah.
We all know he says 10K. Yeah. I tend to write kind of long. That's my fault.
On short stories. Well, in general, we're talking about that. Yeah.
So that's pretty much all I have today. I'm like 2 weeks behind on my book a week goal this year, but I was behind last year too, and ended up catching up about October time frame. So I'm still pounding away at that, reading a whole bunch of books. And Josh says the Josh mirror. I like that. I'm gonna take that.
There you go.
Leo asked real quick, Scott, before we get into your update, when is KSM going to put together a $1,000 contest into fundraising anthologies, like I said, for bail money or falsely accused of indecent exposure? First of all, Leo, when it ever comes to you, it's not falsely accused of anything. But that reminds me, we are going to do another flash fiction deal here coming up. I just need to wrangle some judges. I know a couple people volunteered, but I've lost those messages. So maybe into this week, I'll put something together. We'll get some images and start up the deal. If I can get some judges to read the entries, we have one of our viewers. I'm not going to mention who they are. I use a very ambiguous pronoun, but they have graciously offered to basically supply a kind of prize for the next flash fiction competition. Kendra, I can't say it. Flash fiction competition.
I like that better anyway.
Yeah.
Flexion.
So
Flexion
basically, and it's not going to be anything big. It's basically going to be a bag of keystroke coffee and a coffee mug. I think we're going to do.
So if you write a fliction, then you have a fliction.
Yeah. You have an affliction for fliction. Yes.
I did an affliction. It was fantastic.
So look forward to that. More news in the Facebook group. But Scott, go ahead with your update, buddy.
So I have a question. OGL, that's what? Open gaming license? I see lots of memes.
OGL. Is that the whole thing with there's a gaming company that's got a lot of drama going on?
Well, Wizards of the Coast and something else, and that's. But I'm assuming that means open gaming license.
It could be.
My daughter is really into D&D. She has like 2 different groups that she goes to once each, couple times a week, and does some driving to get there. And she's really into it. She's really into the gaming, which I'm of course proud of. But I asked her about that. She didn't know what the hell I was talking about. What's OGL? She's like, what? So
right,
she must be not doing the online
open gaming license. There we go.
Right,
open gaming license. Yeah,
I'll get a hold of Walt and we'll answer all my questions at a future time. And so if I really have a question, I just see it a lot, and I'm making sure that, because I just want to call it ogle. Why is all this ogling going on?
Yeah,
there. So my updates, basically, I've been writing a ton. As I mentioned, I finished Galactic Shield #4 today. It will be the last book in that series. It's interesting. We could have a Cry for Scott episode sometime, because it's done okay as far as how it's sold, but not quite as well as expected. And I felt like it's one of my better things I've written for a while, and I've got a lot of feedback from people that say it's the best thing I've written for several years. It's just, that's the thing, and that's an important aspect of writer resiliency. Is sometimes you write good stuff and it just doesn't land
right,
doesn't connect with the right readers, not for lack of trying. I know that Jeff Chaney put a lot of marketing power behind it, and it's doing all right, but it's not doing as good as most of his books that he promotes does. So I do need to write gooder. I see that because evil exists. Yes. Also the reason.
Hey, look, I thought Galactic Shield was like, of all the books I've written or read of yours, which are numerous, I thought that it was your best work so far, for sure. Because sometimes I love audiobooks, but the last 10 or 15 that I've done, I've had a hard time listening to, just out of self-consciousness. Yeah.
And I listened to Mark Boyette's rendition of Galactic Shield and was really happy with it. I felt good about what I had written. I felt great about the way he performed it. And it's just one of those things. I think the big problem is it's a mashup. So even though it's not really, it's just the Reaper, except the main characters are cops and they have a cop squad. But it comes across as a police procedural in space, and that is not something people are interested in, apparently.
Yeah.
Or if they are, I didn't find them because they're not down with it. And then I have a bad experience with mashups in general, like Dark Landing. I have some people here remember Dark Landing. I get really good feedback from Dark Landing. I had somebody at 20 books tell me they had read the entire 12-book series 10 times.
Wow.
So they liked it, but it doesn't sell.
Right.
And I think it's because mashups are dangerous. When you do science fiction and Western, you think you're getting both audience, but you're really just getting the tiny part where they touch in the Venn diagram. So, but anyway, so that's what I did. I finished that. I am working on another project with Cheney, and then I have some of my own things. I have a series I've been working on for Athon for over a year now. The first book is done, basically about halfway or a third of the way through the second book. I really like that one. I could talk some more about that in another show. And then I'm trying to wrap up the Blue Sun Armada series. So we talked about that the other day, and I thought about ending it, but what I'll probably do is whenever I can, I'll write one and add it onto the series, just kind of as something I do for me. It's obviously not going to make a lot of money because the books are getting published like 9 months apart, and in our genre or in my fan base, that doesn't really get the momentum you need to make very good sales, but they get decent reviews. I have a lot of fun with them. I wish that I could get them into audiobooks because they really are a lot of fun. I enjoy them a lot.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's what I'm doing. And then I went to the doctor today, and of course I had a 2:00 appointment, and I didn't get seen until 40 minutes later, and so that's why the show had to be pushed back. That's my fault completely.
At least it wasn't due to technical difficulties today.
Right, like
just
my shit's all broken.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into the topic we were talking about. I saw Alan Cheeseman with a comment earlier and said, this is where I'm currently at. My co-author and I are world building like crazy. This step is critical to the shape of successful stories. Our project is huge and daunting at times. And I think we've all been there where we're looking at a project and going, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And, and now I'm gonna layer this on my story, Weaponized, because that's what I'm writing right now. So that's my point of reference, and I'm sure you have some things to talk about too. Really quickly though, before we jump into that, I want to do something we haven't done in a while, and that is talk about a book. We haven't done a book of the week forever on Keystroke. And tomorrow, Rick Partlow's book, he's in the chat. What's up, Rick? Tango Down comes out tomorrow from Athon Books. And I would be absolutely honored if you'd go and pick that book up, support Rick. He's a great author. He's a good friend. And I'm going to read the blurb and bring back some real classic
Keystroke. Blurb reading magic.
The end is near. Cameron Alvarez and the crew of the Orion are hot on the trail of the Seekers, following the predecessor faction on their quest to find the source of the Skrella infestation. But the crew is close to the breaking point, and their commander, Colonel Hachette, is long past it. The death of Sergeant Major Campbell has left him devastated and unable to lead. And the only one left capable and willing to take command is Cam. Cam leads them on their hunt for the legendary womb, the world where the Skrella are created, and learns the horrible secret of who created them, a secret that might not just spell the end of their mission, but the end of everything of doom. That's Rick Partlow, Tango Down, Drop Trooper 11. I can't believe he's on 11. That's crazy. Go pick it up on Amazon.
Series.
Yes, it's a great series. The cover is just cool. Can you really beat I don't even know, like Scorpion aliens versus battle armor? I don't know how you do any better than that. But
flying battle armor from drop ships, and yeah, it's just
go check
that's
it
a
out.
favorite. Yeah,
It's good stuff.
good stuff.
All right, so let's jump into the topic today. So this came up. Go ahead, Scott.
I was gonna I'd like to frame it two things about
yes,
it, but
do some framing.
okay. So years ago, there's a science fiction author named Mel Odom, and I heard him talk at the OWFI, Oklahoma Writers Federation Incorporated, which is a writing conference nearby here. I'm pretty sure he's the one I'm going to attribute this to, but he talked about world building and two general types of world building. So you have like world building out and then world building in. And so the world building in is when you, like Cheeseman was talking about, you develop the whole world. You know everything about the world. You develop all of your lore, and you have this huge tome. And then world building out, a lot of times you get just enough to where, like, say your mission happens on the coast of this planet. You start there, then you build out as you go through the story. That's more what I do, but I've tried it both ways. And so, in that framework, that's two different basic paradigms we might talk about as we go forward.
I agree. And I kind of I do like back and front end world building where I create the stuff that I need to tell the story. And then as I'm telling the story, I come up with things that make the story better. And then I've got to go back and fill it out. And what kind of jarred my thinking about this topic this morning is I was writing a scene in Weaponized where it's kind of a lull in the action, and I have to have kind of I call them bridge scenes. I'm not sure if there's a more technical term for it, but for me, a bridge scene is not directly plot related, but it gets us from one plot point to another plot point, and does some character development, world building kind of in between. And in this universe, there is I created a game called Warball, and I came up with this idea. I needed to have a sequence where the characters are meeting a underworld contact. And my original idea, I'd already had people meet in restaurants. I'd have them meet in bars. I'd had them do all these other things. And I wanted something different. And while at a football game last summer, I had this idea of, meet in a stadium. It's big. It's out in the open. There's a lot of people around. It gives a big set piece to kind of play around with and kind of expand upon what's happening on top of the dialogue that's going to be happening with the characters. And then I was like, okay, well, what can we do sporting wise that is cool and interesting and potentially hasn't been seen before? And I thought of I was at a football game, and I thought of, okay, what if I mash football with like 4-meter tall battle mechs that are controlled by drivers on the sidelines, like battle bots. You know how they control their bots on the sidelines. And as the game progresses, it becomes steadily more violent, and there's score involved, and as they're going through the match, they get sword weapons that they can hack the other mechs apart, and that takes that mech out of the game, and they're doing all this different stuff. So I spent a good amount of time while I wasn't writing, coming up with the kind of the principles on the game, and not super deep, but just enough where I could show it. And so this morning I was writing one of those scenes where we kind of got a glimpse of what this war ball is, setting up the sequence for later on in the book. And it was really fun and wasn't exposition heavy. And I think that is the key to any good world building or character development, or even providing just backstory or anything to your character, to your book, is avoid exposition at all costs. And a lot of times, especially with science fiction and fantasy, you get world building as exposition, and or character development as exposition, where you're having pages and pages of this came from this, and this person did this, and then this colony arose out of that, and it doesn't really affect the story, and it's one of those things that immediately pulls me out. But if you can give, in this case, if I can give a little bit of a glimpse into Warball and show the reader what Warball is, kind of have the characters discuss some small things about it. The whole sequence, plus or minus, is about 1,400 words. And it leads into, like I said, another chapter where they're back on plot related. It's not overpowering. It doesn't drag the story down. No, it really doesn't affect the plot, other than to set up the sequence later on in the book where they go to the stadium and they meet the contact that they're meeting. And it also gives a little bit of context to what's happening in the stadium while they're there, that I don't have to go into nuts and bolts about. If they're in the middle of a conversation, I don't have to stop and go through 4 paragraphs about what's happening,
because you don't have to have the exposition during the action scene, because you've already set that as something you can draw and put it in the toolbox, which is a really good point.
Yeah.
And you're avoiding the white page syndrome by fleshing out the world, what people see and think and do, and then you can use those as your setting without a lot of description,
right,
when you're supposed to be doing action beats or something to that mark.
One of the things that I was messing around with while I was writing that scene was something that you love greatly, which is AI. And I came up with this concept art using Mid-Journey. And this isn't like 100% what I had pictured when I was thinking about the Warball mechs, but that's basically it.
Oh, yeah.
That's basically what I had in mind.
Awesome.
And now I don't know what the AI did with these fingers over here. It looks like, you remember the movie, Scary Movie, with the butler that's like stirring mashed potatoes and he's like, my germs. But that's basically what I have in mind. Some like big honking looking, sporty looking.
Somebody told me that Mid-Journey doesn't do hands well.
It doesn't do hands. I mean, it is what it is. It's a fun little thing to mess around with. But I did several different versions of this type of thing, and just to kind of have and look at, and maybe I'll use them as during some Facebook posts or whatever. But I thought that was fun to put an image to what I was seeing in my head. And
two things. I think that's really cool way to use that type of stuff for your own personal inspiration. I just really worry about people trying to pass it off as either using it for book covers or claiming to be an artist and charging people when they're really just using, this amalgamation of other stuff. So back on topic though, Alan Cheeseman says it's more important that the writer fully understands the minute details in order to his great story. And that's very important. He's absolutely correct. I watched Patrick Rothfuss gave a talk at a conference, and he talked about his world building, and he's a huge world builder. Now, put that in context, that kind of bit him in the ass because he hasn't written a book and completed it for 10 years, like since this talk. But he talked about, he is really so, and he said the general rule is you should use 10% of your world building in the story. So of all the world building you do, you only use 10%. And so, but he said he only uses 4% because he does so much world building. And his example was he really likes money and coins, like collectibles. And so he developed an entire monetary system to a dead empire on another planet that never touched the story, but he knew everything about the currency, all of its variations, every bit of its history. But he did that world building just to kind of have it in the back of his head. Yeah. So you definitely can't put all of your world building into the story. And I think that's where you get dumps of exposition, because people are like, well, I spent all this time on it. I need to share it because people care about it as much as I do, which they don't.
Right. And I agree. And I think that if I actually wrote down all of the world building that I do a lot of world building mentally, and then I probably only write down the 10%. And so I use most of everything that I write down, but because I know, like, innately the way that I read and what I want to read, I don't want to bog down the story with useless details. So when I think of things, I make notes on really just the high points. Like I make a bird's eye view of what's happening, and then just delve into the pieces that I need to. And I think that the thing when it comes to like back end world building is I had written the entire first book and almost all of the second book's outline before I even thought about Warball being a thing.
Right.
And but because I hadn't published the first book yet, I could go back into the first book and add that in to a couple of different places, not very many, but a couple of different places where it gives a little bit of texture, like Leo mentioned. It gives a little bit more of the lived in feel of the universe,
Right.
because you kind of sometimes you get into the issue of, like, I'm a big plotter, so I get into the issue of just 100% plot, and that's all you write is plot, and then your world is very, like, you have tunnel vision on your world, and as you're going through the story, all you see is that small tunnel vision portion of the entire world that is around.
Well, and
so
you
coming
might
up with
know
these-
it. Yeah, you
Right.
know the world in your head, but the reader doesn't know it because you haven't told them anything about it, and that's
Yeah.
an easy mistake to make. Over the last several years, I mean, most of my books have very good reviews, but you always get the one person who's like, it was a little slow, and I'm
Right.
like, I don't even know how you could start with more action in the book without being ridiculous. And I'm like, how do you mean this is slow? It literally starts in medias res, and it's just going for it, and there's all kinds of stuff. But people will always say that, and so I have become more plot driven, like you said, where sometimes I feel like I'm just writing a series of action beats, and where I do, and I have a lot of world building, like we were talking about earlier. When I'm developing the premise for the story, I'm developing the story world in my head so I can have these characters and what they do, and then I write it without a lot of consideration for that. It goes in where it needs to. But when I do my revisions and proofreading and stuff, is where some of my best world building comes, and it's really natural and fun.
Yeah.
Because I know the characters, I know the world, and you'll be like, well, if I was walking down the street, what would it look like? And then you come up with like 3 things that are amazing and add a lot of richness. And that's some of my favorite stuff.
Can you think of anything off the top of your head? We're talking about Galactic Shield earlier, like
Galactic
world building through that.
It's one of the examples, and this may not seem like major world building, but so there's a antagonist in the story named Myron Day, and he's an assassin who's wanted on every world, and so there's the main character sees some wanted posters because, spoiler alert, this is going to be a villain later in the story he's going to have to deal with. But I had mentioned him, and the funny thing is actually he'd been mentioned in book 1, but I'd never finished that story thread. I'm like, well, now's his time. He's going to step up to the main attraction. And so I wanted to remind people that this character existed. So he kept seeing these wanted posters or billboards. He's like, man, the Raziks really hate this guy. They don't like him at all. But later in the story, he starts to realize, you know what? Not all of those billboards were wanted posters. Some of them were just his picture. And so he starts noticing that this guy just has his picture every place. And it speaks to the psychology of that character, that he's going to try to take over. He's got this literally galactic sized ego, and he just puts his pictures up there next to the wanted pictures because he wants the better picture, I guess. I don't know.
That's amazing.
So
it's like,
really,
what's that show where he's like, he finds this watering poster and he's mad because it was only like $1,500 and it should have been like 10,000.
Oh yeah,
or something.
Well, that's one of my favorite Disney movie is Tangled, and the main guy, he's always doesn't think they got his nose right or something. But so that gave me a lot of visuals, and so I started really seeing the city. And I remembered that I wanted to have these like space elevators, and so then I would go back and I'd be like, I found reasons that they were important to the story, and I did just a sentence here and a sentence there, never a lot in one place. But when you read the book in its entirety, it has this kind of rich texture of world building without a bunch of dump at one place. And for me, I really felt it came across pretty good, and I hope other people like it too. But that's one example of how sometimes the world building grows beyond your initial conception, and that's where you really get the awesomeness.
Yeah.
When it starts to become organic.
And I think sometimes you get in that world building cycle of just all you do is world build, and then you don't actually get any writing done. And then
Well, my oldest son is an amazing reader and is very creative. And for years he would tell me, and he would talk to me for hours about the books he was going to write. And he had literally probably a decade and a half of world building. He told me about it, never wrote one word on the book. And I think that's the danger of world building, is sometimes excessive world building. It relieves your urgency to write the story.
right.
And so sometimes you got to put the world building aside and start writing the story.
I think too that some stories, especially in science fiction and fantasy, they do require the author to do some world building before writing because of the nature of a new universe and new technologies, and you've got to kind of understand like what you're doing in this. What are your characters capable of doing, so that you can form the story idea that you have around those concepts. But I think like my suggestion, my recommendation would be to go extremely light on the world building until you figure out what you need. Like, for instance, Weaponized takes place in an intergalactic setting where there's a whole bunch of systems and a whole bunch of, different government, like world star nations, whatever you want to call it. And I have 2 named nations in the universe right now that have had names from the beginning, which is the League, which are basically the good guys, and the Federation, which is the bad guys. I didn't until this morning know the name of the president of the League, but I needed a name this morning, and so I came up with one. I still have several places where I have planets and space stations that don't have names, because the name really it wasn't necessary, and I didn't know it ahead of time because I didn't know that I was going to need it in the planning process. I think the only world name that I had picked out at the beginning of when I started book 1 was a planet named Lubos, and that was where the initial mission takes place for one of my characters. But I remember when I was first writing Valor, and even before Valor, that I would come up with like star systems and have lists and lists of star systems. I have a briefcase around here somewhere that has starship names and like classes, like battleship classes written for like hundreds of ships, hundreds. And I never used any of them.
But you'd have to remember all that. And that's kind of brings up it. You can write yourself into a corner with too much world building, because if you set down lots of rules, you now have to follow them, because your readers will, a certain percentage of readers will remember all of those rules that you set up and things. And they'll expect you to like, well, you mentioned this world and I thought it was cool, so when are we going there? You're like, well, you better go there. You remember?
Well, and it kind of almost like it almost forces you to have to use that stuff when it may be that the story doesn't need it. And then you're just putting it in, like you said, you're putting it in because you know it's there and you want the readers to know that it's there. And so you're putting it in extra, and it doesn't have anything to do with the story.
But it also is nice that if you suddenly need to take a turn, like you're like 6 books into a series, you're like, hey, I remember this from my world Bible.
True.
Well, that's what I did with the Raziks, because the Raziks in book 4, the Raziks are like basically like Dragonborn aliens, and they're these huge. And I'd run into them in the first 3 books for Galactic Shield, and thought they were cool because they're always kind of funny and they're jokesters and they always defy expectations. And you think that they're going to be like, and they are very murdery, but they're also kind of hilarious. And like, they like avian cloaks, and avians of course are winged aliens. And so they got these goofy clothes they wear, and they really defy expectations. So I decided this book 4 is going to be all on their world. And so when I went into world building their specific world, I had a lot of energy built up and anticipation for it. And basically, they're kind of like Dragonborn noir cops in space, and they're a blast. So I hope people read all the way to book 4 and check that out, because it's one of my favorites. Do you remember when we did? Remember, this goes way back when we were doing our what do we call it, the Purple Throne, or some? We had some working title where we had a video conference every morning. Every morning we had a video conference we recorded for like 2 months or something, where we did sketches and we brainstormed and we world built the hell out of this fantasy story we were going to write someday.
I remember. I think I still have those videos somewhere on one of my external hard drives.
Everybody should.
There was a couple of comments I saw here that I wanted to hit before I forgot. Oh, Jay says the Federation is the bad guys. Bold move, Cotton. Yeah. Yeah. Screw the Federation. Briefcase of Tom said he has a spreadsheet with an entire fleet on it. Maybe I'll use it someday. I mean, it's not bad to have, like, especially if you're like I liked having it, because then in my mind I was like, okay, I know that these, like, visually I know that these things are there. And at the time, honestly, like, when I did that, I was like 16, 17, 18 years old. And so I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but it was still like a fun exercise. And it added a little bit of something. Alan asked if I'd ever used an online name generator. I use, what's it called? I use one almost every day. And it is called fantasynamegenerators.com. I'll put it in the chat here. I use this name generator for almost everything. And it's great. A lot of the times I'll still, when I'm drafting and I don't want to stop, I'll still use like capitalized name if I don't know the person's name, or I'll capitalize like planet name or system name. Mm-hmm. I'll do that a lot because I don't want to stop and go and start clicking through the generator to find a name that I like, because it'll kill my momentum. And 5 or 10 minutes every time I need a name or a system or whatever, that kind of adds up. So I usually leave all of that until I'm editing, or if I'm stuck and I'm going back through and I'm kind of looking at different things, then I'll fix it. But fantasynamegenerator.com is a great place. I'm not sponsored by them at all. It's not a sponsored deal. I don't get any money, but they have a lot of things that are over just names. Like, you can get technologies, you can get ideas, you can get places, things, like everything you can think of. This website has it in terms of naming conventions, and it's really a good tool. Yeah. So I would definitely recommend using it.
My biggest problem with name generation, like, I use lots of, like, I should use the generators. I've known about them for a while, but like, I always wind up getting a baby name book or something and be like, Swedish boy names, and then I'll be scanning through it. But my biggest problem I have is that for some reason, when I generate names, like, they'll all start with the same letter, and I'll have like 15 characters that start with M or C or something. And so I have to, like, a lot of times I'll disregard a name because I have too many characters named that starts with a certain letter.
One thing I do like about this in particular is that you can, it has like fantasy and folklore names, but then it has real names also. And I don't know how real these names are, but they're basically, you can select any culture from the world, from Earth. Like, it has Polish, Japanese, Danish, Azerbaijani, like Filipino, and you can click on those generators and it will give you names that are or close to culturally appropriate names. So if you have a character in mind that you're like, oh, I think this guy is Korean, or I think he's whatever it is, you can click on that and just kind of like scroll through those cultural appropriate names and find something that you like, or piece a couple of names together. But going back on the world building part, I think too that one of the things that I find that I do more pantsing than plotting is character. Matter of fact, it's probably one of the only things that I do in my writing that I don't plot out is character and how they kind of grow and manifest. I think I mentioned last week that one of the characters, and this might have been in our writers meeting a couple weeks ago, but one of the characters I wrote, I ended up at the end of the book deciding he was going to be a religious guy. And I had to go back through and take out all of his curse words. And then, so the one time he does curse, it's very impactful to the story.
Yeah.
And him being religious really doesn't impact the story that well, but it gives, again, it gives a little bit more depth.
Some variety and depth and all those things.
And so I went back in and added, like, he says a prayer at the beginning of the mission, and you know, one of the guys, one of the characters this morning, he is a Warball junkie, and he absolutely lives and breathes Warball. And that's something that I'm going to have to kind of seed into book one that I didn't know about until today. And I gave him a little bit of, you know, like my brother used to work for them and I used to go on the sidelines and blah, blah, blah. And so it's 3 or 4 lines, and it didn't take me but a couple of minutes to write. And it's not an in-depth history on him or his brother or anything like that, but it gives him a little bit more depth than just being part of the plot. And that's one of the things that I'm working really heavily on this year, is to make sure that I'm not just grinding on the plot like 24 hours a day.
So another thing that you can have that affects your world building is kind of like these random like misunderstandings. Like when you're saying Warball, I keep hearing wereball, and I think of like somebody changes into a ball, like the werewolf. And I'm like, that's a whole different game, I think.
Yeah.
Like, changing this big furry ball that gets kicked around or something, you know, so you could work that into your story or something like that. Or like,
maybe I could put that in my fantasy. My fantasy could have wereball.
Yeah, there you go. I've had this. I do this actually a lot, actually. So since I work with various publishers, including Cheney or Athon, and so then when they give me the book cover, sometimes I'll be like, well, that picture, I kind of need this, whatever is in there. And that will become like, for example, the mask in Fear the Reaper was not in the original story, but I was like, the guy had a mask. I was like, oh yeah. And it became a huge part of the plot for several books, just because I was like, yeah, I like that image. And so I'm going to go with that.
What was the book cover? There was a Reaper cover that got redone, and it was right before the series rebranding of the covers, where it was some dude like being contemplative, looking at a head or something.
That one never, thank God, got published. It was one of the very early drafts, and it was kind of a what do you call it? What's the Shakespeare? Oh man, I cannot believe I'm forgetting this.
The Thinking Man?
No, it's the guy who murders his father or whatever. The Shakespeare.
Is that Macbeth?
Macbeth. Yeah. And it's kind of has that feel to it. And we're like, it's not quite right. So we changed it. And then the first Reaper book has been changed 3 times. Hamlet. It's Hamlet.
Hamlet. Okay. Yeah. Hamlet.
I should know that. It's been a while since I had a Shakespeare class.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Actually was a
now everybody's going to be typing Hamlet. Like, we're the worst podcast in history.
Well, these ignorant,
look, I've never read Shakespeare. Sue me. I've never read Shakespeare. I don't care what you say. I'm not going to read. I'm not interested.
Yeah. Well, I took a class, and it was interesting. If you have a good teacher, that's the way to do Shakespeare, is to take a class with somebody who's got a theater background, and they do some live readings, because it really needs to be read and performed rather than just read from a book. Shakespeare's not really something that's fun to just read from a book.
I watched the one with DiCaprio, if that Matt, like that totally counts.
Well, the thing is Shakespeare is public domain. And that's why there's a million fucking versions of every Shakespeare stories, because we could write a keystroke medium Shakespeare. We're writing keystroke rhymo Hamlet.
Yes.
And that's going to be our new one. We're going to do that. So what's Alan's question here?
It says, Scott, that brings up a great question. I've seen some authors include a glossary at the end of their book to provide detailed information about terms, technology, and places. Thoughts?
I've done that because the fans like that in the Cheney books. But it is very interesting. Well, when I write, it's handy to have it right there, but maintaining that over a 15 book series, like the Last Reaper series, is difficult because a lot of the stuff I put in there doesn't really pertain, especially the character names and stuff. But I've had readers call me out on that stuff and be like, well, I thought this, and what about this? And this person's name is not spelled the same or something, especially. So Jeff has a lot of beta readers. It's a very robust beta reader group. And they go through, they go through the glossary that we put in there, like with a fine tooth comb. And I don't really think that much of it because it's like, oh yeah, there it is. That's something you can look at if you want to. I don't really care. But yeah, you could do that. I think it might be genre dependent. If you had like a fantasy book, might be a really good idea. Like if you had like I'll say it wrong, the Silmarillion that Tolkien has. Yeah. Something like that is almost a book in its own right. Something like that could be really cool. I think if you like doing the glossaries for your readers, then I think you should do them. If not, I would not bother with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to them. I used to look at them. I used to read them in whatever book they were in. I know that like Peter F. Hamilton does it a lot in his space opera books, just because there's like thousands of characters in his books.
You kind of need it.
Yeah. Chris Ruccio, the author of the Sun Eater series, he has a glossary in his books. It's not. I
meant to bring him up because he does great world building.
So, fun fact, he's going to be on the show next week.
Sweet.
So tune in next Monday on the 23rd. Christopher Ruccio, the author of the Sun Eater series, is going to be on the show. We're going to talk to him about his series. It starts with the Empire of Silence, goes to the Howling Dark, which is my favorite. But we're going to be talking to him a little bit next week. But the thing about glossaries is that nobody's going to not recommend your book because there was a glossary in it. No one's going to get to the end of the book and go, there's a damn glossary in this book, and throw it across the deal and not read the second one.
How dare you?
It's really one of those things. Like, if you want to put it in, okay, put it in. It's not at all going to affect your book. It's not.
But if you get a super fan, they might dig it.
They might dig it.
So if you get some super fans that are like the Galaxy's Edge, where they have people that are like making armor for cosplay and stuff, they might dig the glossary because they're that into the universe that you created, and that would be, some good fan service for that special 5% of awesomeness.
The one time I have really looked at a glossary in a book is with the Stormlight books and the Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson, because those glossaries, he does a really good job explaining the magic system, but there's a lot of different levels to it. And so by reading the glossary of multiple books, you can really better understand what he's doing with different magic systems and what they're capable of doing with them, because sometimes the people using the magic systems don't fully understand the magic system as a character. But looking at the glossary, you can say, okay, this is what element it's tied to, this is what it can do, this is what it affects, blah blah blah. And so that's helpful if you really want to know the magic system or know the properties of the book that you're dealing with. But in short, I don't think you can go wrong with a glossary.
Leo's got a good point. You could do it as like a reader magnet or something to give to your fans in your newsletter or something.
Yeah. And you can hook those up. Like, you can do like QR codes at the back of your book and say, hey, scan this with your phone, go check out the glossary or whatever.
Or you could, at the beginning of your book, you could say there's a glossary at the end of this book. If you don't read it, then you're going to fail the test, because there will be a test. So
there's a test later.
I know you're reading for fun, but there's definitely going to be homework. So
Guy Anthony DeMarco mentioned a wiki, and then Patricia just mentioned it too. Recently found out about a site called Fandom for Online Wikis. Had a reader do a lot of that work for me. Oh, interesting. So you can get some minions to do the work for you. I don't have minions, so I'd have to like go hunt one down and
You
find
find
one.
some minions, and I
Drug
looked
them
at
with
Word
cheese.
Anvil. I was involved in a project that used World Anvil, and I didn't take to it. And that's mostly because Josh has heard all of my learning process for new technological things. Like I started using Dabble, and I like it, but I also may have shared some profanity
Yeah.
in our writers group.
Yeah,
do every single time I learn anything new on the internet.
I've looked at World Anvil. I can't remember if that's the one. There's one that I looked at that had like a map building thing attached to it, and the map building, it was like a browser based system, and it was very intuitive and very cool. And I played around with that for way too long. I don't think it was World Anvil. I think it was something else, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
There's
But it was really
probably
fun
a
to.
couple good out there.
Yeah, it was fun though. I mean, like especially in a fantasy where most fantasies have maps and you
I think if you were doing lit RPG, it might be important to do glossaries and stuff.
Yeah,
could be, because
sure.
that's kind of like building a module to play out or something.
Trucker Charlie had a good idea for audiobooks with the glossaries. Is put a website in there where you could go and check it out. That would be good.
Be super helpful. We're gonna have to wrap this up because I do have a writers meeting at 5:00.
Oh yeah, cool, man.
And time has flew on this episode.
I'm glad that we're back doing this. Hopefully we'll be able to maintain the 2 p.m. deal, no problem. Next week, that's what we're tentatively scheduled, 2 p.m. with Christopher Ruccio. If you haven't read the books yet, I highly recommend at least checking out the Empire of Silence. It's a phenomenal book series. I absolutely loved it. It's with Peter F. Hamilton and his Commonwealth saga, the Pandora Star and Judas Unchained. The Empire of Silence is by far like right there, like number 1, number 2 of my most favorite space opera of all time. So
I like it as good as some of the Dan Abnett Warhammer.
Oh yeah, those are good too.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with us this Monday and taking the time out of your afternoons to participate in the live chat and make us feel like we're not just two lonely old dudes talking on the internet to ourselves. We appreciate it greatly. Come back next week. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. Peace.